Welcome to today's episode of the podcast. I'm really excited to share today's guest's story with you all. And before we jump in, I'd really appreciate if you could take a moment and rate the podcast on Spotify or on Apple. And this is going to allow the podcast to reach more people. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to the Strong for Life podcast. I'm your host, Conor O'Shea, and today I'm joined by health coach and nutritionist Jonny Landels from Next Step Nutrition and Next Step Espresso podcast. And Jonny has done over 748 episodes, so he's a bit of a podcast beast. So definitely interested to talk more about how he's been so proficient at that. So Jonny, do you want to just quickly jump in? And yeah, welcome to the show, mate. Explain maybe a bit about yourself, how you got into the industry, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks for welcoming me on. I got into the industry quite a few years ago now, I think probably 10 or 11 years in terms of fitness in general. I started actually as like a CrossFit trainer, CrossFit coach, and that was just something I did in my spare time because I was doing that method of training and enjoyed it. Through the journey, nutrition had been something I'd always struggled with personally, and after I got some early nutrition certifications and started working with people and got a bit of help in that arena myself, I realized that I really enjoyed helping people with their nutrition specifically as well as their fitness. And then that's when Next Step Nutrition was born. And over the years it's evolved as I've learned more and more and taken sort of different certifications. And the podcast that was started in 2018, I think. And that was purely because I enjoy making content. I enjoy sharing little tidbits of information. I thought I'll just produce a daily show for short little tidbits of information that I can share. And it's just been something I've been too stubborn to stop.
Yeah, mate. That's like 748 episodes is pretty epic. So is that like Monday to Friday you've been doing that since 2018, or how's that been going on?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I still do the occasional interview episode, and I used to be really consistent with doing that like weekly or fortnightly. And then as things kind of evolved and grew and my time got shorter, I was less consistent with finding guests. But I still do have guest episodes on a Friday most of the time. And then if I don't have a guest episode on the Friday, I might do a Q&A or something slightly longer. But Monday to Thursday is the short show. And then I've just been doing it since 2018. Yeah, so that's why we've got that many episodes. And I think actually if we look at it in terms of 748 episodes, it must have been either mid 2019 or because then you've got the flat white episodes are counted separately, and there's over like 120 of those as well. So that's why in total in the podcast I think there's over sort of 860 episodes, something crazy.
Oh wow, that's insane, man. Before we kind of jump into more about your coaching, how do you keep coming up with ideas for your podcast?
I think with the podcast, because it's a daily piece of information, and podcasts are interesting because they do stay in the feed forever unless you give them an expiry date. But rarely people search for podcasts unless they're searching on Spotify. Like I'm not even sure Apple Podcasts or other platforms really have the search function. And I think if you follow my daily podcast, you'll see that the evolution of what I share has changed. So when I was first becoming a truly certified nutritionist, I was sharing a lot of what I was learning on that qualification. So there was loads of things that were maybe busting nutrition myths or giving people tidbits of information that they couldn't find on Google, or if they did try to Google, they'd get a whole host of different answers, whereas I was trying to provide the evidence-based standpoint. And over time, as I've learned then more about psychology and behaviors and habits, I then started sharing that information. And so the daily show almost follows my growth as a coach. And I share the information that I'm learning, and I also share my journey through fitness because my views on how I eat and train have changed, and then that's affected my coaching philosophy as well. And so it's almost like a diary of my life and kind of like what I'm going through, which is pretty cool.
Okay, yeah, let's kind of jump in there, mate. Like, so if first of all maybe explain who you generally work with now, what's the kind of common issues that person's having, and how you approach it. And I know it depends, on the specific situation, but maybe there's some patterns that you see repeatedly coming up, and what sort of advice do you give those clients?
So I work with people who I'd call them all or nothing, like yo-yo dieter folk.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I help is because I believe most of the people who come to me have read pretty much everything they can find on nutrition and fitness, and they've tried many different things as well. They've probably lost weight in the past and put it back on again. They've probably done most things under the sun, including educating themselves on kind of calorie counting and macros and all the rest of it, whilst being well read and being active. I believe that the people I help the best are those that probably get too overwhelmed with information. So it's like, it's not that they don't know what to do. It's almost they know too much about what to do. And they're the type of people that try to plan everything to a T, or wait for the perfect moment, or are a bit nervous about committing to a certain path because it might not be what they think it might be because of previous failures, especially. Or they're the type of people that try something and quickly change tact because they see something shinier, or actually that looks like a good idea, maybe I'll try that instead. Or there's just a lot of inconsistency going on there, and a lot of self-sabotage as well. Amongst that, I find that people I work with, they are good at like tracking calories and things like that, but might not stick with it, because if they're eating over their calories through to stress or emotional eating reasons, or just because of like a bad relationship with food, then those things need to be tackled as well. So I help people who think they know what to do actually do the things they think they should do and stick with it. And that's through a combination of actually helping them, plan out what their routines are going to look like, helping them stay accountable, and helping things like emotional and stress eating and stuff as well, which can come from a poor relationship with food and a poor overall health aspect. And apologies for the disgruntled puppy for being left in. She's annoyed she's been left in the kitchen by herself, but she won't bark for long.
Yeah, that's a great kind of overview there. It's something I say to my clients as well, is like, a lot of the stuff we do, most of the stuff we do, they've heard it before, but it's like the questions that I ask is like, are you currently doing that, and do your results reflect that you are doing it consistently? Because it's kind of knowing versus doing are two very different things.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's just say that person is, let's just say, a guy in his 30s. He's done lots of, yo-yoing. He might get in shape, and then, 3-6 months passes, and he just, everything goes out the window. What sort of kind of frameworks are you going to start that person with? Are there specific like habits or skills that you work on? Are you kind of giving them food education? Are you like, how do you approach that? And I know it depends on the person, but in general, like, kind of what would you be kind of approaching that with?
Yeah, really good question, Connor. And I think there are definitely some like baseline habits and skills and actions that I want everyone to go through. And when I first started moving away from calorie counting, I was thinking to myself, what do I get people to focus on? You think about the classic things of like eat protein and eat veggies and going on a daily walk and getting enough sleep and managing stress. And those are still the things that I would focus on. And then after reading Josh Hillis's book, Lean and Strong, who I know, you're connected with as well, he brought in some really cool points around, making that habit a step further by plating balanced meals. He brought in some good things around hunger awareness, which are things that I'd worked on with my precision nutrition certifications as well. And I really liked how he brought up the topic of diffusion, which is sort of taking thoughts and feelings and separating them from the self so that they don't influence your actions. And that's something that I'd known as notice and naming. And I think that's more of an advanced habit. If I said something everyone should do, then it would be those former ones. When a client first comes to me, I'm a big believer in interviewing the client and asking them about their previous successes, their previous setbacks, and pulling upon those successes and asking them what they feel like they should be working on. Because a lot of the time people, they're the owner of themselves, right? And they know themselves better than we ever can. They're going to know their lifestyle, their routine, their structure much better. And I think through careful, open-ended questions and an interview process of reflecting that back and building the plan together, you can then say, look, these are the frameworks that we're going to be looking at long term. This is what everyone needs for long term sort of health and fitness. There's no magic bullet. There's no silver bullet that we need to go through. But how do we make these apply to your lifestyle, and what things are they struggling with right now that need to be tackled first? And so to go back to what you said, it does depend on the client, but every single person in the world who wants to be healthy and fit needs to manage their stress. They need to sleep. They need to eat balanced meals. They need to eat probably more fruits and veggies, and they probably need to eat a little bit less than what they're doing now, if they're looking for fat loss particularly.
Yeah, so let's kind of go into that in a bit more detail, because on social media, you're getting kind of bits of information, and there's a lot of polarizing statements being made. So one, I think I'd like you to kind of maybe go into more detail, like good and bad foods. And I think, people say there's no such thing as bad foods, but as you said, there's kind of certain fundamentals that you kind of have to follow. So do you want to maybe go into a bit more detail with that? Because I think some people say there's no such thing as good or bad foods. Then I can just eat Pop-Tarts all the time and have a healthy relationship with food. So
yeah.
do you want to maybe just unpackage that for people?
It's really difficult, isn't it, Connor? Because like, if we were to think about this objectively and nutritionally, the two biggest parts of a healthy, balanced diet are having that variety of food and then eating within our means. And obviously then you essentially like, oh, can I just eat Pop-Tarts all day long and be healthy? Well, the answer would be most likely no, because you're not, although you're getting a lot of vitamins and minerals because Pop-Tarts are fortified with them because people realize they're having them for breakfast. They're not exactly providing us with a lot of variety. They're not providing us with a lot of protein. They're not providing us with a lot of phytonutrients, which are chemicals from plant-based foods. They're not providing us with what our body would need to be functional. However, having a Pop-Tart wouldn't be a bad thing. It's not going to give you a negative health response. It's not going to make you instantly unhealthy. It's not going to make you a bad person. And that's where we claim the term, good versus bad foods. I would say that foods are different in that the chicken breast is going to have more protein and lower calories per 100 grams than a Pop-Tart, but a Pop-Tart is going to provide different macro and micronutrients. It's not like it's devoid of nutrients. It's not empty calories. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to suffer from having a Pop-Tart. But if I don't eat enough fruits and vegetables and lean proteins and fiber, my body isn't going to be functioning as well as it could. So some people like to call it the kind of 80-20 rule and guideline and whatever. And then you'll have intuitive eating accounts who are very much like, that's another food rule and that's, that's too strict and whatever. And I do abide by the unconditional permission to eat purely from a relationship with food perspective. But then I'm also helping my clients through that kind of messy middle to the where they say, right, if I'm eating for my health and I'm eating for my goals, what does that look like in a ratio of food that I choose to eat most of the time versus food that I choose to eat some of the time? And I know that I can have that food whenever I would like to, but based on my goals and my health, when do I truly want to? And that's quite a lot of thought process. But if you actually want to be in a position where you're healthy and fit long term, at first you're going to have to go through quite a lot of conscious thought processes around food that you never have done, because otherwise you're just going to be stuck with the same habits you've always had.
Yeah, that is, it's a super deep topic to unpackage, because the reason I brought it up is I think I agree the whole good and bad foods, it can be negative because you can be in a trap where you're eating like ice cream and you're like, oh my God, this is so bad for me. And then you feel shame around eating the thing, then you don't enjoy the actual experience of eating it. And then a lot of times you'll restrict yourself because of that, and then you'll binge again. And you'll get into this cycle of you're not getting any of the benefits, you're just getting all the downsides. So I think what you're saying, I think it's Josh Hillis's work as well about like value-based decision making, which is, do you want to riff on that a bit?
Yeah, well, he's written about it extensively in his book and in his content as well. He's taking a bit of a hiatus from social in terms of creating content, purely because I think he's working a lot on his next book, and he does work on quite a few side projects as well. Like I think he's the he created the eating skills program for GMB or something
GMB,
like
yeah.
that. So it's
Yeah.
quite a big project. And so in values-based decision making, which I can't take from him at all, but it was a great way for him to put it into context that I could then explain to other people is, if you've got values of a human being like flexibility, then you eating the same food day in, day out is not matching that value. It's actually very far against that value, and that's going to come up sooner or later. And if you value your health and you value your goal of maybe losing a bit of body fat or putting a bit of muscle mass on, then you've got to think to yourself, well, how does my food intake and my fitness plan match those goals and values? And the thing is that a lot of intuitive eating gets a lot of flack because of the whole like eat whatever you want whenever you want. But one of their 10 core pillars is the eating for health mantra. But they just mentioned that has to come after you get rid of the diet police and embrace unconditional permission to eat and improve your relationship with food, because otherwise you'll approach that with the mantra of rigidity, as you mentioned there, like shame over eating ice cream. And if you have shame every time you eat ice cream, you're going to feel guilty about it. You're going to not want to have it again, or you're going to overconsume it and then restrict it. And as you mentioned, that just gets you into the binge and restrict cycle. Whereas if you can be in the place where, okay, my value is my health and my value is also being a great family member, then you can then say, well, it's within my values and my goals to have some ice cream at a birthday party or a family dinner. And I know that having it in this small quantity isn't going to affect my long-term goal of being healthy and fit for life.
Yeah. It's a very, I always think it's a funny industry, because getting people to just track everything is just so unsustainable for, I think, so many people. And it's kind of the go-to option, with a lot of trainers. And it's starting to change, which is good. But like, as you said, if everything is just intuitive, that's also like, we need some sort of a framework to actually learn skills. And yeah, that's what I was really drawn to talk to you more about that. So let's maybe talk a bit more about your own story. So you've been a PT for 10 years. What would you say has been your biggest failure over that time?
Wow. I think my biggest failure was probably when I first started coaching nutrition, and I was still quite young as a trainer. And it was that whole lack of empathy and lack of understanding for other people's positions. So I was in my mid-20s. I lived alone. I worked in a gym. I had all the time in the world outside of that to prepare food and, track my calories and practice extra skills if I needed to at CrossFit. And I had a big lack of understanding for people who were in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who had full-time jobs and kids and the responsibilities, having the lack of time to do that. And when I first started coaching people in nutrition, particularly because I'd found success with tracking calories, and that was after I'd failed, all these other different sort of diets and the plans in the past, I was just giving that to everyone. I was like, yeah, my coaching service is this a month, it's mega cheap. Because it was like, I'm just going to set you calories and macros, and then I'm just going to help you stick with that. I'll give you the spreadsheet. You'll check in with me once a week with your measurements and your macros, and we'll see what's going on, and we'll just help you get your goal. And that was just what I did with everyone. And that would be my biggest failure, is that, like, obviously I was just trying to help people, but it was just having such a lack of understanding of what an individual might need. And that's been the biggest learning curve of how to discover that, and two, how to provide that as a service is quite difficult, I think.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think it's a tough one, because you're dealing with humans, so it is unfair, because I've done so many dumb things in my career. Like, I'll be looking back at what I'm doing now and be like, God, you were an idiot when you were 34, even in the future. But
I know, yeah.
But what I was going to say is, when it comes to the nutrition industry, I was very much super interested in the nutrition industry, and I was I guess way more interested in that side of it than the fitness side of it. But then as I got more into it, this is like 2012, 2011, I started working as a PT. And then it became I found it very polarizing and very divisive and very almost religious. So how do you navigate those waters? Because there's a lot of, people are very, very opinionated, I guess, when it comes to nutritional techniques, practices, and approaches.
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because people seem to have their feet stuck in the sand, don't they? And like, they're literally like just there's such a diversity of opinion that people swear by, and then there's almost a bit of, I don't mind the content of like attacking other things. I think when it's done in a bit of jest, it's best, rather than like properly attacking someone and calling them a moron or whatever, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, I kind of fell into that same content trap in the past. Whereas I'm much more of case of, because I'm aware that different things will work for different people, I'm open to saying, look, hey, if this works for you, that's great. But just for, for other people who this doesn't work for, then don't worry about it, because there's going to be a route for you too, type thing. In terms of navigating the waters of those opinions, I mean, it's really difficult, because I try not to put myself in a position where I would comment on someone's and then embrace their attack, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
If someone ever trolls me,
yeah, that's what has that happened like over the last few years?
A few times, but it is rare.
Okay.
And it's only happened when I've potentially taken a stance in the past that I've then changed. So I'll give you an example in that I was trolled recently because I was back in a CrossFit gym, and I was talking about a personal best that I just shared, and I was talking more about how, like, the game of fitness is a long one, and as soon after you've been training for a number of years, your progress slows down, and consistency is going to be key, and blah blah blah. And in the past, especially because I'd started to compete in CrossFit and had found myself plateaued with group training, I found myself brought into an individual training model. As I was educated in that model, I became very dogmatic and very anti-group. That was also at the same time that I was going through a bit of a sever with the CrossFit community, with my own kind of coaching, and also with my work and who I was working with, and a few things happened there. So I was quite bitter, and would very much be like, CrossFit isn't going to help you. You're not going to get results. You need an individual program. That was obviously going to help my own business, because I provided individual programs at this time as well, and still do. So this person was like, oh my God, I can't believe you've got results by going to a group gym. Like, what's happened? You used to hate it so much, but they said it in a way of like, this is impossible. You told us that this couldn't happen. And I did hold my hands up and say, look, like, if you look at my fitness journey, I've done group-based training, I've done competitor group-based training, I've done individual training for a number of years now, which builds a very strong base of fitness. And now I'm back to doing a kind of combination of group training and sometimes my own training, because it's more about me enjoying it and staying consistent, as opposed to peak performance. Mm-hmm. And I still believe that if someone was looking for peak performance, they're best getting an individual program. And so this was the kind of conversation that we were having over comments. Comments are always much harder to get your opinion across than a conversation. So things got a bit heated. I ended up blocking the person just because they didn't really see my point of view, or they were bringing up kind of straw man argument and not really having a conversation.
Yeah.
But that's probably the only time I've ever been trolled. Oh. Other than that, I try not to troll other people, because I just think, what's the point? Why would you go onto someone's platform and troll them when, like, they're just communicating to their audience? At the same time, I dislike the amount of dogmatic views the industry have. People like, let's just say, who are very keto focused or carnivore focused, saying this is the only way that you can get great results like this. I do despise that. But in terms of going to their platforms and attacking them, I never will. I'll just build my own platform of talking about balance. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, in the world of social media, the algorithm seems to favor the dogmatic, because they're like, if you super niche your content, it's going to push it out there, isn't it? And people are going to find it more that if you have a balanced profile that talks about a bunch of different things, I think
Totally,
it's
yeah. And
a
if,
lot
if
harder.
people are commenting whether it's good or bad, like it's going to get more reach. Because like I'm definitely, I've done the carnivore diet for health reasons. I found it super helpful. And the way I look at it, it's kind of like like it's again, it's Josh Hillis, his phrase, everything's population dependent, which I think is such a fantastic phrase,
Yep.
which I guess the way to explain it to people would be if you have two people come into the gym, one person is like a 30-year-old guy, he's been training for 15 years, he can do muscle ups, he can do handstands, he can do double body weight deadlifts. And then we have Susan, who's 53, and she hasn't trained in 15 or 16 years. She's got 4 kids. She has 2 bad knees, and she is stressed out of her mind and she doesn't sleep very well. Like getting them both to do the same CrossFit wad of muscle ups, pistol squats, and handstands. It's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
And that's basically what it's like. Like do the carnivore diet. I mean, some people would thrive in it. I also had a lot of health issues. I had chronic mouth ulcers, which I've had my whole life, and that was the only thing that fixed them.
All right.
So, I mean, I think if you want to lose a bit of fat, the carnivore diet's crazy. It's ridiculous. But I think for people with kind of, autoimmune issues that, doctors haven't been able to figure out, and they're like, you know what, I want nothing to lose. Yeah, I don't think you have anything to lose,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I would never recommend clients to do the carnivore diet, but I've talked about my experience. I'm like, it was amazing. And
Yeah.
I'm so grateful now that I can just go on a meat diet if I get a flare up again. And it's
Yeah.
fantastic. But I think for someone else, it will create disordered eating patterns and not get them the results in a way that something like, I mean, the approach you're doing with people will long term. So yeah, I think it's just important for that. I mean, that's kind of lost online. People will say, and then also just that meat is bad versus vegetables are bad.
Yeah.
Like that argument as well is like, I think meat and vegetables are probably fine, but probably all the processed crap is bad. Like so yeah, that's I think the big thing. But do you have anything else you want to talk about in that direction?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there in the summary, Connor, of population dependent being a key piece, and also asking yourself like why you might do the approach, as you mentioned. For some people, them trying something is going to be their effort to make things okay again. And I had to, with working with people, you have to lower a lot of your biases, because like I found after my first certification, which was very much like about busting myths and talking about what healthy eating actually is and what the basics are, and talking about the science behind it and stuff as well, you found yourself becoming very anti anything and being like, well, that's ridiculous, isn't it? And you're a moron and blah, blah, blah. But then if you work with someone who's like, well, actually, I've had really bad issues with my thyroid and doctors couldn't get to the bottom of it, and I've tried meds and that didn't help. And the only thing that helped me was doing a paleo approach, which was also low gluten. And now I feel amazing and I've lost loads of weight. You're like, oh, cool. Well, that's great. Like I can't call you a liar, can I?
Yeah.
I can't call you a charlatan or a tit or a dickhead, because it's like they've clearly gotten great results, and it's like you then have to work with the person. It's population dependent. I thought you put it that way really well.
Yeah, and I think it's also looking at like, are you looking for optimal health? Like looking to be, again, that kind of top 5%. And that's some people are. And I think then that same person is probably, super into their training. And then the other person just like, well, I just want to, lose 4 or 5 kilos and enjoy my weekends with my friends or with my family. And I don't really care, So putting them on this uber restricted diet, especially if they don't have that history behind them, yeah, I don't think it's helpful at all. And I think that's a lot of the conversation online is like one camp is kind of talking to someone who wants to lose 4 to 5 kilos, and the other camp is talking to someone who wants to be like super high performer. And then people think that they're kind of talking to the same population, which gets very confusing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about any events that shifted your approach to how you coach over the last few years.
Oh, wow. Where do I start? Yeah, quite a few. Because as I mentioned, the way that I coached at the beginning was very much a case of, hey, come work with me. I'll give you a calorie plan and we'll take it from there. As I learned more and more, I adapted that that was my baseline for quite a few years, because I felt like if people were coming to me for fat loss, particularly, or performance, or a combination of, I would be able to help them best if I could give them a prescription of how much they would eat and be like quite specific with that, particularly that ratio between sort of protein and carbs, and especially for those that wanted to drop fat but keep muscle and kind of perform well, which was a lot of my audience at the time. And something that really shifted the way I coached was basically looking through my own journey and my own client results. So like with my own journey, I'd kind of oscillated between tracking and not tracking. And every time I didn't track, I put a bit of weight on, and I would have to track to bring that back again. And I thought to myself, how am I actually ever going to get to a stage where I just don't need to worry about this anymore? Like, I'm getting really bored with tracking consistently. And with my clients, I could see a similar thing. And also I could see some people would get great results because they just ran with tracking and did really well with it. And others just wouldn't gel with it at all and would struggle with consistency. Or, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, despite tracking calories, would overeat them. And if they did overeat, they would sabotage even more because they felt like they'd failed. So I was attracted by the Precision Nutrition Level 2 cert, and they rebranded that to call it like a Master Health Coach certification. And I prefer the line Health Coach for that reason, because of the holistic nature of what I do versus just coaching nutrition. But the beauty of that course was that we looked a lot into the psychology of why someone eats and their behavior. And we looked a lot into disordered eating habits and patterns. We looked into things like the notice and name technique, which I mentioned earlier, where it was how someone can be very hyper aware of what they're thinking and feeling and call it out, and but then be aware of how that might drive their food decisions. We looked at things like time management and environment management and all the rest of it, and how that can affect food decisions and social circles. And we looked at health in a much deeper construct. And, you know, precision nutrition talk a lot about eating slowly, eating mindfully, checking in with hunger, and using internal signaling for food decisions. Mm-hmm. And so that was the big, when I started to learn more and more about that, because I had, you know, I'd heard about mindful eating and things like that in the past. But when I did the PN Level 2 and it was provided in that structure, and I thought to myself, well, that's actually how I can start to apply it with clients, is looking at these things first off as starter habits and building it from there.
Can you, sorry for jumping in, mate, but can you explain internal signaling, how to note that?
So internal signaling just means like you're taking internal cues to judge your decisions, and whether that would be how much sleep you need versus how much food you need versus how much water you need, or you're relying on internal cues to judge those things rather than relying on external cues, which has become a big thing from like step count to exercise to sleep. We're all relying on fitness trackers and wearables to tell us how much of these things do, rather than taking it from our own body. And food in particular, that would be your calorie tracking versus how much food do I need to eat today. And so internal signaling would be relying on your hunger and your appetite to decide how much to eat, as opposed to an external plan. And but building that again takes frameworks, guidelines, and practice. It's not just something you instantly start doing and you're amazing at.
Totally. I think that's the big thing with this. Like, there's so much more coaching involved than just being like, it's 1,200 calories and do these movements and just fill out the form and you'll get results going forwards. Yeah, I think it's super interesting, mate. Like, I think the ability to self-regulate is the most important skill we can learn as human beings, because that's basically going to make or break your life as a whole. You know, I think all of our problems come from inability to self-regulate. And if that's, you know, whether it's overeating or, you know, not managing stress and making worse decisions, or X, Y, and Z, or, you know, alcohol, drugs, all these things. So I guess because you're kind of starting, I mean, PN, I love their stuff. I'm PN Level 1 certified. And I guess they're taking a lot of stuff from therapy, right? From the world of therapy. So you're kind of getting into the waters because you're specifically doing nutrition coaching. So how do you manage if things are getting into the realm of maybe this is like, trauma based, or there's kind of deep seated stuff that's kind of beyond my scope of practice? How do you work around that? What's your kind of way of going about that? And what advice do you have to maybe other coaches and also people who maybe don't understand why they keep, repeating the same problems and they just can't help themselves? So yeah, I'd love you to maybe riff on that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point, because as part of my development, I did an online CBT diploma, CBT being cognitive behavioral therapy, and I'm yet to complete the advanced one, which is on my list of sort of CPD to do. But I'm very clear with my clients that I use techniques of that in terms of like analyzing someone's thought patterns and their behaviors with regarding food and fitness and health-based practices. If they start talking to me about, as you mentioned, trauma, or let's say they're struggling with grief, or they're struggling with relationship issues, or anything else, like if they talk to me about full-blown eating disorder patterns as well, like I'm not actually a therapist. And so I don't have a set therapist I recommend. I do have a CBT person who I see myself. And so if it's something that's within his remit, I refer out, or even work side by side. But oftentimes if a client does bring those things up, I'm quite hot to pull it down, shut it down inside a consultation, to say, look, those things are outside my scope of practice. It's better for us to seek a therapist. But it's working with the client in terms of what's available to them and what their budget is. So like if a client can't afford to work with me and work with a therapist, but the issue that's causing them to eat emotionally is something deep rooted that I can't help with, well, then they're better seeing the therapist. And I'm honest with them about that, and especially with eating disorders and other things that might happen, self-harm and deeper things. If they have the budget to work with both, fantastic, then let's work together. And there are registers where you can search for registered counselors with certain skill sets in certain areas who may offer online things that you can then help a client search for the right person for them. And I think because my auntie is a certified therapist, and so I always ask her, because I always forget the thing, but I think it's it's the BACP. So you have the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. So for those of us that are listening in the UK, that would be the place to look, because then you can search for therapists in some area and certain specialties, and you can help the client refer. Because a lot of the time a client may come to you as their first port of call because they're unsure who they might need help from.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I think in the future, it would be awesome if the health system gave people like someone to help them with fitness, nutrition, mental health, and then also finances as well. I think it would be, there's three such fundamental things that you don't really get a huge amount of training on if you're, in school or an education point of view, unless you're, born into a family that just gave you that. So last kind of main question, and we're going to go into rapid fire, is who would you say out of your whole career or even your life, like three people that have had the biggest impact on your development as a coach? But I mean, this can be outside of coaching as well.
Wow. Okay. Biggest impact. My development as a person or a coach. I mean, that's a really tough question to limit it to three people. I guess in terms of, I've got to tip my hat to people like John Berardi and Martin McDonald, because without John Berardi creating Precision Nutrition, without Martin McDonald creating Mac Nutrition University, I wouldn't have had such a, comprehensive and fantastic education to do what I do now. And then the third person who has had the biggest impact on me would probably be my mum, because let's be honest, she brought me up in this world. And, for people who know my story, I lost my dad a number of years ago. My mum was then sort of solo parenting for a good while, particularly my adolescent phases and my early adult to now phases. And she was the one who gave me the inspiration that I could do anything I put my mind to, and I didn't need to follow formal education. And that's what gave me the courage to pursue in my former years musical theatre. And if I hadn't pursued musical theatre, I wouldn't have found CrossFit and I wouldn't have become a coach, and that wouldn't have led down to where I am now.
Wow. Yeah, that's huge, mate. Definitely. That's giving you that confidence to pursue what you wanted to moving forwards.
Yeah.
Awesome, mate. So let's go into rapid fire. Who would be your ideal dinner guest and why?
Oh man, you're killing me. My ideal dinner guest would be, oh man, I've never thought about this question in my life. I know you said this is rapid fire. Let's just go with, okay, my ideal dinner guest would be trying to think of something quickly. Hugh Jackman. Definitely Hugh Jackman.
Nice.
Jackman.
Okay, awesome.
I love his...
Yeah, he's because he does theater as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. And he's absolutely jacked.
Exactly.
For what in life are you most grateful for?
What in life am I most grateful for?
Mm-hmm.
I am most grateful for the ability to do anything that you put your mind to. I think if you truly want it and you put the effort in, that life actually has so many opportunities in this 21st century that you can truly do anything. And I'm so grateful for the fact that I've chosen a passion.
Awesome, mate. If you had a special ability like tomorrow, what would it be and why?
Teleportation, because taking ages to get somewhere is a real bugbear of mine, and I would love to just be able to teleport somewhere instantly.
Awesome. What is your greatest accomplishment to date and why?
My greatest accomplishment, I think, would be starting this business and working with the amount of people that I have, because a lot of personal trainers unfortunately do exit the industry after a few years. I'm lucky to have been doing this for sort of 6 to 7 years now and have quite a good back history of client success. And I think the persistence to keep with something like this with such an up and down industry and an up and down thing like self-employment, I'm quite happy with.
Yeah, that's huge, man. And yeah, we need more people staying in the industry. So what book or books would you recommend? Maybe let's talk about training nutrition book and then anything else.
Top books I would recommend would be Eating Skills for, to be lean and strong, which is Josh Hillis's book. Intuitive Eating, the 4th edition, I actually think is a great book if you want to improve your relationship with food and learn more about the tenets of eating for health.
Who's that by?
That's by Evelyn Tribole and Elise Reich or Elise Resch. I might have to give you the spelling of those names. So those two are fantastic. In terms of training, MMA Conditioning by Joel Jameson is a great one for energy system training. I think it's Christian Thibodeau's Black Book of Training Secrets. That one was really helpful for like general program design. And then other books like Mindset by Carol Dweck.
Love
that. Have you ever read Bounce by Matthew Syed?
I haven't read Bounce. What's that about?
So Bounce by Matthew Syed was recommended to me by my singing teacher because it's about the power of practice. And the myth, it's the myth of, it's similar to the talent myth in that it's about the power of practice and the fact that Tiger Woods wasn't born a great golfer, but instead he just put hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours into it and then was a great golfer.
Awesome. So yeah, similar to Mindset as well.
Yes. Yeah, gotcha. They work hand in hand. Those two work very well hand in hand. Great.
Okay, cool. Any fiction?
Fiction, I'm not a massive reader of fiction. I used to be, but the thing that I was a big fan of David Gemmell books.
What's the surname? How do you
David Gemmell is Gemmell.
Okay.
But unfortunately he passed away. So there are quite a lot of books, but there weren't any more obviously after he passed. But he told sci-fi and fantasy about like, it wasn't like aliens and things like that. It was more about warriors and like tribal people and so like axe fighting and sword fighting and things like that. And I had a bit of a nerdy obsession with that when I was a teenager. And I still do. And so like if you like watching things like Vikings and stuff like that, you'd love David Gemmell books, basically.
Cool. Okay, awesome. Last question. If you could put anything on a billboard in somewhere like Times Square, or where you're going to reach, millions, if not billions of people, what would you say and why?
Oh man. What would you say and why? Wow. You're really asking me to kind of put my life ethos in a snapshot of a thing, aren't you?
We're gonna basically cut these now and put them online, and then that'll be you summed up in like 10 seconds.
Yeah, and you'll have to cut these pauses out so that people actually get a quick fire response. Okay, so if I had a giant billboard somewhere, I would probably say life's too short. So make the most of it.
Yeah, awesome, mate.
That's really cliche. But like, because of everything that happened with my dad in particular, and then that perspective of saying, okay, well, if you're only here once and life can be potentially quite short, what do you want to spend your time doing? I think too many people just find themselves in a cycle of life where they're just doing the same things, and they're just stuck in a rut, really. And I think actually, if you can shake something up and seek out what you truly want to do and do it, then that's what you need to do, because otherwise, before you know it, it'll be too late. And if you live life with regrets, it's pretty crap. Yeah,
I think that's so true. I think it's the article, the top 5 regrets of the dying, and that's one of them is wishing I lived the life that I wanted to live, not someone else's life.
That's powerful, isn't it? Because with social media, how many of us are truly doing that? And how many of us are actually trying to impress other people or be like other people rather than finding out what we really want to do? And I know that's scary for a lot of people with regular work and things like that, because they have responsibilities and bills and kids and all the rest of it. But when you start thinking about these things and getting things written down and truly starting to think about it, you'll find some creative solutions, because you don't always have to jump in completely.
Totally.
You can usually dip your toe in and find out things first.
Yeah, I think that's good advice as well. To even if you're not in work that you like, you can start navigating, on the side, moving in the direction that you want to.
Yeah, there was a great book actually that was it was mentioned to me by when I did because I've just like the people I work with, I sort of take on kind of every course and thing that I can do, and I did the OPEX CCP, which is
is it good?
Yeah, it is really good. And part of their modules was lifestyle coaching, and part of that was they recommended this book called The Values Factor, which is by John DeMartini, and it's the secret to creating an inspired and fulfilling life. And it's genuinely like a filling book. You've got to fill things in.
Awesome.
It's like a CBT based book, because it requires you to do a lot of thought and writing things down. And it's all about finding your values, living your life true to those. And it was interesting because I did it when I was in a bit of a low place. And I was like, based on these results, it seems like I want to help people with their health and fitness.
Yeah, I've never actually checked out his stuff, but when I was in Melbourne, there was tons of guys. They were huge into John Martini, and like they had only good things to say about him. So I think that's another reminder to actually dive into his stuff.
I've just realized that I'm kind of halfway through that. Maybe I'll finish it, see what happens.
Good stuff, mate. So look, I really appreciate you taking time out of your afternoon today. Do you want to maybe tell people where they can find out more about what you do before I let you go?
Sure. Best place to go to is nextstepnutrition.co.uk. If you want to follow me on Instagram, my handle is just my name. So as long as I'm sure it'll be spelled correctly because you pronounced it very well as well, Connor. And then, Next Stop Espresso podcast if you fancy listening to some short tidbits of information.
Yeah, and you've got like 748 episodes to get through, guys. So there's lots
so
there to keep you.
Either search for the topic you want or just start now. I'm sure I'll cover the same topics over and over again. So
awesome, mate. Good to connect, and we'll chat again soon.
Thank you, mate.